All right, cool.
Cool.
All right, without further ado, we'd like to talk to you all today about the a particular case study that we have. We refer to this as HiatusRAT, and another component later on that was somewhat connected to HiatusRAT is Cuttlefish. And these are both functional Chinese espionage activities. These campaigns were, well, let's just say that they were very highly advanced, and they just keep doing stuff. And as you'll see here in a moment, they don't care who catches them. They really don't. And you can catch them, and we'll just show you how they just keep coming. But let's talk about a few things first. Why should you care about any of this stuff? Who cares, right? It's APTs, right? Like, they don't really steal anything from you. They don't make your life any more difficult. Only that's not true, because what we find is that in many cases, what APTs are doing today, your cyber criminal groups are going to be doing in 6 months, maybe a year and a half, whatever it is. Those techniques that we'll show you are being used today are going to appear in a ransomware campaign near you sometime very soon. We'll be talking about HiatusRAT 1 and 2, and technically 2.5-ish,
Sure.
right?
We're on now.
And then we'll talk about Cuttlefish, and then we'll kind of conclude with a little bit of context for you. So why should you listen to us instead of going back to TikTok or extending your lunchtime?
You guys are literally in New York City. You could do anything
Could
right
be
now in
anywhere.
the entire world.
You could go to a show. It could be any day you want it to be. But you should listen to us first, because we're the ones that found it when nobody else did. And secondly, because I think you'll find that it's going to be entertaining enough to kind of peek behind the veil on some of the most modern techniques that we've seen APTs use in a little while.
For those of you who don't know us, I am Danny Adamitis. This is Mr. Ryan English.
Hi.
We're both researchers at this wonderful company called Lumen Technologies. If anyone from Lumen is here, we love you guys. We get paid every week.
If anybody from Lumen is here, could you raise your hand?
Or legal.
Or
Okay,
legal?
Cool. Anyway,
So no marketing, corporate, or legal from Lumen is here.
perfect.
Sweet.
All right, so
We're in
we
business.
focus on threats to ISPs and telcos because we are a large international ISP. My name is Danny. I've been doing this for a decade now, which is kind of weird. I have a strong interest in things like DNS hijacking, router-based exploitation, campaigns targeting things like Unix and Solaris devices. I just love the old stuff that's still hanging around because it's the part of the internet that's forgotten that everyone seems to love to go after. And then, of course, we have Ryan. Ryan, do you want to say a word or two?
Yeah, I'm just here to catch a show.
Okay, cool. Moving on. So for those of you who don't know us, we have this threat intelligence team at Lumen that we call Black Lotus Labs. Now, everyone's always wondering, okay, cool, where are you guys getting your data from? Why should we care? Is this unique? Are you just crawling the internet? And the answer is we kind of do a little bit of everything. We have the level 3 resolvers, if you've never heard of them before. It's a very large company. We also have a large, extensive global NetFlow holdings that we use. We also provide managed security services and products to a whole bunch of companies all around the world. So in case you're wondering, how big is that NetFlow chart?
How big is that chart?
It's pretty big.
It's big.
So all of the blue is what we own. So we basically have a pretty good size of the subsea cables, and we're able to actually extract some telemetry from them, and we use that to kind of feed into our various products, our threat research, and trying to make the world just a little bit better.
Just a little telemetry, though, right?
Just a little bit.
And just a little bit of data. But just so you know, if you want to quantify that a little bit, Lumen carries more data across the world, across the internet, than any other single entity that there is. Like, more traffic comes across those wires than anybody else's traffic. So we're not catching stuff off the endpoints, we're catching stuff before it sees the endpoints of other things.
And just to quantify that, that's not his personal opinion. That's that of Cicada.
That's just
Cicada's
science.
kind of the world that like measures ASNs and interconnectedness, kind of this
number
third-party
one.
thing. But it's okay. Moving on.
All right.
Cool.
Okay, so why should you care about this? Why should you care about especially these types of threat groups? Well, I don't know, but the ODNI kind of cares a little bit about it. They have said this over and over, right? That this particular threat at this time is the broadest, most active, and the most persistent. And persistence is kind of like the middle name of this whole next hour for everybody, right? It's not just cyber espionage. It goes into theft of IP and the effects and the dollar amount that those things represent at the end of that chain, which is you paying more for stuff. But also, compromising telecommunications firms and managed services, they cause all these things to happen on their own accord, but they create blueprints for others to do it as well.
They also have rich follow-on opportunity. See, this is what we call foreshadowing. We're going to see this again in about 10 slides.
Yes, we have more than one source for this. Obviously, it's it's a little bit more recent, but these government notifications keep coming out, right? It's not just ODNI. There'll be about every 6 or 8 weeks, some agency will come out and say, hey, you should worry about Chinese threat groups. And you just hear it so often that you just kind of just go to sleep on it a little bit. But I'd like to point something out, all right? You've been hearing this for a little bit more than just the last couple of years. And one of my favorite statements was made in July of 2012 when General Keith Alexander said the loss of industrial information and intellectual property through cyber espionage constitutes, my favorite part, the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. And that's a lot of money. And this was 12 years ago, the guy says this to us all. And that's because it had been happening for a while. And now here we are 12 years later, and I don't think that if you look at the second statement, all the stuff he said back then is like, we really need to worry about the destructive effects that they can execute once they're getting into these networks. We should start worrying about this. And here we are in 2024, and there's still people going, we got to worry about that. And it's like, we didn't worry about it. We've been told to worry about it all this time, and we're not doing enough worrying about it because, as Wendy pointed out earlier today, it's kind of hard to get this part right. It really takes a lot of time and money, and who has all that?
The last thing is for some of the youngings out there. If you do not know General Keith Alexander, he was the former director of the NSA during their transition period where they incorporate Cyber Command. He was kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal, but what did he do after that, Danny?
We're not talking about that right now.
We're not talking about that?
Okay, you can ask Zach, and you guys can have your conversation afterwards.
Okay.
All right, moving on to the actual hacking part, my favorite
He
thing.
took money from the Saudis.
Okay.
Okay. What is HiatusRAT?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. This is a remote action tool set that we saw, and we called it HiatusRAT because they would just take some time off, have a little hiatus.
No, that's not it at all.
No, they get back to
You
work.
don't remember anything, do
I don't
you?
remember any of that.
We're going to get to there.
Okay,
All right,
we'll get there.
It's fine.
You want to talk about this part?
Sure.
Yes.
So we saw them targeting these routers. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure everyone has seen these routers. These are those things that are in the back of that IT closet. They're probably covered in dust you've never seen before, but they're there because that's how you actually connect to the internet. They're kind of important because without them, you don't have access to the internet. Our initial campaign was targeted towards dry-tech Viga routers. For those of you who don't know, this is like a kind of manufacturer. It's not really important. The important thing is that these things were able to have VPN connections for up to 500 remote clients simultaneously. So again, sometimes when you think about Soho devices, you're thinking of my lovely line. I love to make fun of my grandmother. She has an iPad. She used to love to do Wordle. Maybe you watch a soap opera, and that's really it. You have 1 or 2 devices. These devices were actually used by what I would call a small or medium-sized business who needs really good throughput. We observed them targeting a couple other devices such as Ruckus, QNAP, and again, it's just kind of showing that this is a code base that could be cross-compiled for different architectures. So again, once you start talking about Sohos, you're going to hear things talk about ARM, MIPS, MIPSL, i386. You basically have that common code base written in C and just cross-compile it for whatever it is you need.
These are routers that were built south of Houston. We're in New York, and nobody's getting that joke?
No.
They're all from out of town.
Oh, you guys are all from out of town. All right, thank you very much. No.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So
The important thing isn't the router maker model. The important thing is the processor.
and the other important thing is that I will say this is for anyone who works for like an EDR vendor or managed service provider. You guys are actually doing pretty good. Like, kudos. So because they can't actually operate on these Windows workstations the way they used to a decade ago, they started moving to these routers. Why move to the routers?
Oh, gee.
There's no monitoring.
No?
There's no logging. There is no shiny magic black box on your quadrant from Gartner. There is nothing to do except for manually going in and inspecting these devices. And no one's ever going to manually inspect these devices unless you have some weirdo on the internet who picks this up as a side hobby.
You know, Wendy talked earlier about why aren't you just patching all the time? Just patch. All right, raise your hand if you have updated the firmware or the OS on your own personal routers at home. Oh, Jesus, this might be a record.
Wow, this is like, yeah, usually
I'd
get
say,
like 3 guys.
20% of the room, 15, 20% of the room, which is pretty great. But this is a room full of people who are interested in or practicing cybersecurity for a profession. If you say this in a room full of people who maybe work in a corporate environment, the hands don't go up. Nobody really cares about what happens at that router because it's just plain working. And if it works, your IT department will tell you what's the golden rule? Don't touch it.
Downtime
Don't touch it.
costs money.
Yeah,
If
no.
you have not heard that before, you need to know this.
Yeah.
In operations, downtime costs money.
But Danny, this thing has an OS that's 14 years old. Downtime costs money.
Downtime costs money.
Shut up. All right. Next.
All right.
All right.
So, quick overview about what actually transpires. Our earliest indication is that this campaign started in July of 2021. Some of you guys may have been freshmen back then. It's still ongoing. Our earliest samples that we found were compiled for version 1.5.
Everybody starts at 1.5.
Yeah, I was gonna say, does anyone here write code? Does everyone start with like version 1.5-ish? No? Usually you start with like 1.0, but okay, cool. The other interesting thing is that because these were end of life, they're no longer being supported by the vendor. There is just a plethora of CVEs. Every day, new CVEs come out, and a lot of those things are actually applicable to older models. And while they'll say, we're only gonna patch this on, I don't know, pick your favorite Zyxel vendor, because that's who we get to strong arm into actually doing a patch for, those things are actually really trivial to kind of tweak to work for a different variant. Once these things were actually exploited, we saw them basically drop two binaries, or 2 custom compiled files, one of which was a variant of TCP dump. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's the way you can basically just capture packets as you're traversing. And the second one is called hiatus. We basically saw this, and we thought it was really interesting. The packet capture, if you were outside of a corporate environment, or like a small, medium-sized business, you might have something like an on-prem Outlook server because it's cheaper. And again, as you're a small, medium-sized business, you really need to focus on your bottom line and trying to stand up the business. Those Azure licenses are pretty darn expensive, so let's just stand up our own thing. So what we saw is that they would be one hop out from that Outlook server and running packet capture over ports associated with SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and you could actually start getting some of those emails, not from the server where there's actually detection logic from Defender, but one hop out where everything has to traverse through. We also saw this HiatusRAT thing that we're going to talk about have the ability to upload files, download files, or act as a redirector.
You know, we missed a meme here. We could have had, we're not talking about practice, we're talking about the game.
Next time, man.
But there's something to think about, and we won't go into it deeply here, but on your own, consider something for just a moment and then file it away for later. There are millions and millions of end-of-life devices all around the world, all over the internet, and those end-of-life devices will never be patched or updated by their vendors again. And we've seen cyber criminal groups put out bounty lists of end-of-life devices where anybody who wants to use your criminal proxy network can donate an exploit that they can come up with for anything on that list and now use the proxy network for free for life. Like, hey guys, you could pay us for this proxy network, or you just give me, there's 150 continuously updated routers, and any of you guys who comes up with a good exploit for them, we'll let you just use our router proxy network for free. So this is stuff that actually makes it into the criminal ecosystem. End-of-life routers are everywhere all the time, and they're expensive. Like who's got money for all these replacements? So Wendy addressed that. I just wanted to touch on it one more time. Bless you.
Thank you. So this is roughly how it works. There's typically some sort of exploitation. They do some host-based enumeration. They want to make sure they're actually on the victim box. You're not running on some droplet in AWS. That's where hosts do not exist. That's where security researchers exist. They don't actually want to live there. They start running that lovely packet capture feature. They have the HiatusRAT Trojan to upload, download files, do all of your modifications, and it starts speaking out. This is pretty common. You guys are going to see this again and again. It's just nice to orient people. What do you do once you're on the system?
Hang around.
The first thing you want to do is, since these things actually don't have a ton of RAM, and like I want to say compute is actually hard on things that are 20 years old, you want to make sure you only have one instance of your malware running at a time. If you have 4, 5, 6 times, you can actually basically DDoS yourself and then you lose access to that. The way you typically make sure you only have one version of the malware running is through something called like a mutex. So it's like a mutually exclusive string that exists on the host that lets them know, hey, I'm already infected. Don't infect me again. You're just cutting into your own CPU, dum-dum. So the way they actually do this on things like routers is they would actually open up a listener on the port. In this case, it was port 8816. They would also grab things like your MAC address to make sure that this is a real MAC address. They would get your kernel version, your architecture, your firmware, and just some additional information. From there, we actually saw them grab things like your IP config. This would give you your public IP address of like where you are on the internet. We also saw them grabbing things like your ARP cache. Your ARP cache allows you to enumerate your layer 2 connections for those of you who love your network OSI stack. This will allow you to show everything that's a logical connection, and you can see the devices behind the router to see if there was potentially a Zimbra server, an Outlook server, if there was anything at all, or if it was just a droplet hidden behind DigitalOcean. The last thing they would do is they would actually collect a list of all of the known mount points on the particular system. Now, this was a little bit savvy. Basically, what we think they're trying to do is say, hey, is there any other malware that currently exists on this system? As Ryan has pointed out, this is a very lucrative target right now for a bunch of APTs, cyber criminals, basically anyone who's trying to get covert infrastructure. So they want to make sure that they're not cohabitating with any other malicious actor and that they're kind of keeping their operations exclusive. So this is something we see a lot more from the nation state side. We don't see as much from things like the cyber criminal side because YOLO, Lambos don't buy themselves. And then, of course, they would start to enumerate the processes. So this is my lovely graphic. This is what we made. I know everyone loves it. Okay, I'm not going to quit my day job. Yeah, this side.
Gosh.
Woo. See, I even made my little white Wireshark thing. Yeah, that took me like 20 minutes. Okay, moving on.
Corporate doesn't like us using contraband images, by the way. We were admonished
Yes, we're not
in
going
our last publication. Where'd you get that little fin? We don't have that in the library. All right.
But anyway,
That's when you'll see.
wait till you join corporate
Wait till you get
America.
in corporate
It's
America.
fun. All right. So basically what this is denoting is that you have a bunch of remote users. How many times have you guys been outside of your classroom and you're going to say, hey, but let me just check my email. If I have a day job, I'm going to, be waiting at the bus stop for the bus to show up. I'm going to be at dinner and maybe my partner went to the bathroom. Let me just scroll down. You basically have to connect through that router to talk to the Outlook server for your corporate instincts, and they're basically living there in between. So this is kind of that unique space where there really is no detection, and that's basically all we're trying to denote. The other thing is that they actually have 2 different servers they were using simultaneously. How did you extract that information? Let's talk about parse config files. So this is exactly what it sounds like. In a lot of these malware files, you'll have something called a config. This config kind of allows you to have some modularity in what it is you're doing. So like one thing we kind of called out here is what's called a tick. So this is how long you want your heartbeat to go. Sometimes if you see like these cybercrime people, they'll have something as small as 2 minutes, maybe we'll do 5 minutes. Sometimes you'll hear about a thing called like a jigger, where they'll be like, okay, it's like 5 minutes plus or minus a minute to try to do some time-based analogies. In this particular instance, the time interval was 8 hours. This is something that we don't see a lot because this shows that they are just trying to be real stealthy and kind of fly underneath the radar. The other thing we'd like to call out is that the version we found in 2022 was version 1.5. To me, that suggests that this is probably the 6th iteration of this malware. This has probably been ongoing since like 2017, 2018. Like it goes back a while. And the other fun thing that we would note is that they actually have 2 different servers. So if one of their servers went offline, they would still be able to perform operations. Because redundancy is important. Now, why would they want to have all this data in the first place? And why would they start PCAPing things and ports associated with Outlook? Well, if anyone is familiar with the InfoSec space, over the last couple of years, the Exchange servers themselves have been under attack. There's been numerous reports from people like Hafnium exploiting everything. There was a nice report from Kaspersky, how they found brand new modules. I think there's one for Checkpoint where they have passive agents. Basically, everyone in the world wants to start hacking these Exchange servers because they want to get that email content. That email content is very rich in intelligence value. The problem is that as more people start attacking this, defenders actually up their game, and it's becoming increasingly hard to get that access and get that information. So instead of trying to best the Microsoft Mystic machine, they say, cool, we're just going to take one-stop hop out, and we're just going to collect the data and transit rather than trying to do endpoint collection. So again, we saw them looking for things like FTP, SMTP, POP3, IMAP. And of course, these ports could have been modified at any point in time. They did have remote access. This is just what we saw in one of the shell scripts we were able to recover. And again, the other unique thing is that they were running this tool called TCP dump. If any of you guys have ever been a network administrator, this is a real tool that real network administrators use that probably actually lives on these devices anyway. It's kind of that living off the land mentality where they're trying to kind of evade detection, where if you saw HiatusRAT, that's initially what tipped me off. But when I saw the TCP dump, I'm like, oh, got you, dog. And of course, by living and collecting this data in transit, it's really hard to to detect if someone is modifying data in transit. A lot of the security stacks we have now, or a lot of that spackling, is detected for the endpoint itself. And because they were able to kind of collect that in transit and there was no alerts, you get long-term access. Do you want to?
Do you want to?
Sure.
Keep going. You're on
All
the
right, I'm on the roll. So we're going to talk about this. There was 2 functions that I thought were really interesting about HiatusRAT. So once we start reverse engineering this, you guys can obviously start extracting the embedded functionality. That embedded functionality kind of lets you know like what it is they think they want to use this tool set for. There was 2 functions in particular that were really interesting to me, one of which was called TCP forward, and the other one was called SOX5. TCP forward is exactly what you think. They would basically opening up a listening port. They would receive connections over that listening port. They would then open up this other thing and say, cool, anything that comes in over this one port, we're going to call it port 123, would then be transmitted out to a remote IP address over port 431. The way you do this is if you guys start doing threat intelligence or threat hunting, you want to identify those command and control servers. So what they'll do is they set up these redirectors in order to kind of obfuscate that next hop up, with the idea being that if you take one redirector offline, you might hamper that one campaign, but the other 10 campaigns can still occur in parallel.
Redirectors are important. We'll show you why.
The other fun thing is we also saw this thing called SOX5. So SOX5 is basically the same functionality, but it has a little bit more modularity. So you can do things like UDP. You could do things like IPv6. You can even base your authentication to require a token. So even if you were to scan the entirety of the internet with something like Shodan, Census, Binary Edge, it wouldn't respond unless you had that embedded token also installed. So this is kind of what we suspect this would look like. The most possible situation is that you would have an actual beaconing agent, and that beaconing agent would be directed towards a router. That router would act as a redirector. That redirector would then interact with that upstream C2. Or the inverse would be you might have someone coming from an actual C2 to the router to something like a passive web shell. This happens all the time. And again, if you were to start doing this over something like UDP or IPv6, we then saw all of this and we decided to, of course, so other fun thing, we work more on the threat research side or threat intel. So once we start seeing this weird stuff, we obviously reach out to our counterparts in the threat detection and we go, hi guys, we found this cool new APT. They're doing all this amazing stuff. Look at, they're doing redirectors from a same geographical location as a target area. Can you guys help us write detection?
Do you guys look for redirectors at all?
And this was basically their response. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's important to note, right, that a lot of the things that we see them doing are, they've done their homework and they know what people are looking for and what they're relying on. They know the tools that are in common use, and they're simply staying around the perimeter of those tools that are in common use, knowing that once we have something on and it's working, many people just go to sleep. And that's just a human thing. I mean, this is a level of psychological understanding of their target that we see played out in actual techniques.
Cool.
Yeah.
We need to speed this up.
We do. We're running out of time. Go.
Yeah. So basically, we have IP addresses. IP addresses are bad. Once we have IP addresses, you can enrich them with things like open source census data. Census. One of the fun things about census is you can actually see things like the first seen in the wild based off of the scan data. Now, this is really important to us because they are what we call an independent third party. This means that if they said the first time they observed this anywhere in their database was on July 29th, that means that that's probably an actual truth statement. Sometimes, with malware, you can forge things like compilation timestamps. You can kind of forge some of those configurations. But with this being a third party, we put more value and more faith in that. And we can basically just start to track this back over time and forward in time, which we'll do in a minute. Quick thing. So, of course, everyone's like, who was hacked? Here's our heat map. It's awesome. It's basically everyone in the world. We know this is weird trend with Belt and Road Initiative. It's a fun read. You should check that out later. The other fun thing that I will note is that they were actually collecting email traffic. And when we actually started looking at the countries that they were targeting, you can kind of make some assumptions. So for example, if you're targeting someone in Brazil, the people there are probably speaking Portuguese. If you saw them targeting, Somalia, their very popular language there is Swahili. If you saw them in Portugal, they're speaking Portuguese.
You already said that.
Yeah.
Go again.
Okay, if you're in Russia and you're speaking Cyrillic, are you happy now?
Yes,
Does that make you love me?
Gosh.
All right. The other fun thing is that once you have all of this, I want to say packet capture data, you still have to process that together to actually form these emails. And even once you have all these emails, you have emails from like a dozen different countries. In order to then actually use that intelligence, you then still have to translate that back into some common vernacular, which to me shows that whoever's behind this has a very robust back end and that this isn't one lone guy hanging out with his dog. Yeah, basically they were targeting governments, oil, pharma, everything, and cloud service providers. It's super cool. Nothing to see here. Moving on. Up to you.
So we publish our report, and we're patting ourselves on the back, and we're all getting ready to take a few days off and pretty much put our feet up. And then in the very immediate future, or the immediate period of time right after publication, Danny decides, well, you know what? Let's just take another look real quick and see what the old data says and see, when we do these things, Lumen allows us to null route any kind of known bad guy architecture. So we can, on that big network we showed you earlier, we can tell all of our exchange points, hey, drop every packet that came from this C2 or that bot. We can do that for criminal botnets. We can do that for APT botnets. We simply make it so none of that can transverse our network. It's pretty cool, right? Killing whole botnets, publishing it, putting it out in the world. Other people can kill those botnets too, or at least, put them on their list of blocking.
Ooh,
and
can I do the quick plug?
Yes, please.
The best thing about this, it requires zero customer interaction.
None.
So again, here's the thing: is a lot of people, you get these YAR rules, you get these detection logics, you have to import to Splunk, you have to open a peer ticket. This is just happening invisibly behind the scenes, making your life easier.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're playing on easy mode.
Easy mode.
All right, moving on.
So you take your allow list, you take our IOCs that we publish, and you're like, don't allow that. Cool.
Cool.
All right, but you know what? These threat groups, as I said earlier, they just don't care. They're just going to keep coming. And how many times do they have to teach you that lesson? Apparently, a bunch of times. So all of a sudden, we go back after we've null routed all this stuff and publish, and we've told the whole wide world that this server and that address and this certificate are all bad. And then what? Weeks later, not even 2 weeks later, yeah, that heartbeat server is still active. That upload server is still active. The malware agent is still circulating. All these things they just rebuilt them on different ASNs and kept them alive.
No, they didn't change anything.
They didn't change a thing.
So this is the thing. It's like typically
say
when
rebuild,
you publish on these threat actors, they go, oh no, you caught me. Let's try to rejigger parts of this. And they'll move it to a different C2 IP address. They'll maybe add a couple anti-debugging strings so your YAR rules don't work. They'll UPX packet. These guys just literally said YOLO.
We talk a lot about in cybersecurity about imposing cost and making the adversary do something different. What do you think about an adversary that says, yeah, man, nice report, really well written, cool.
Love it.
Yeah, hey,
we're still
get
gonna
back to
keep
work,
going. Yep.
same stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, or the new kid comes in like, hey, new kid, just use that network I just got done with, you're fine. All right. So, but we did see some new victimology because they figured, well, screw you guys. We're not only going to care about what you wrote, but we're going to use the same stuff to go after Taiwanese targets in the U.S. military. Ooh, that's not only telling us that we can go screw ourselves, but we're going after really better stuff than we already had. It's pretty insane to see a C2 node come back on census, and we should have made that bigger.
We should have made it bigger. All right, so I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version.
I got a
We
label
had
corner.
this thing, we track the metadata. You can use that to draw correlations and get inferences and try to find infrastructure. Basically, it's the exact same thing. The one difference is the common name from the old stuff had a common name of 127.0.0.1.
Right.
When they came up with the new infrastructure, they transitioned to 127.0.0.0.2. We're good to go, dog. Ship it. Yeah, you can kind of see this. So that was, I believe, for the heartbeat server. For the upload server, they changed the serial number from 1 to 3.
To 3.
We're good.
You can't stop me.
Yeah.
All right. So Obviously, we saw, like I said, the targeting shifted. We see a lot of stuff coming from Taiwan now. Okay, great. I wonder why they're focused on that. Again, sometimes when you're looking at a threat actor and you're not quite sure who it is, you think, well, why would Russia be targeting all kinds of municipal governments and power companies and things like that in Taiwan? Probably not. That's not their immediate interest. They're worried about other bigger problems that they can't solve because they're ridiculous. But, this is an advanced threat actor thinking into the future. God, who makes 5-year plans? I know we don't.
No,
America
we don't.
doesn't do that shit. No,
You're not thinking about next quarter, man.
No,
Just
I'm not.
KPIs up.
That's it. But I know who does think about 5-year plans and who does think about the future. And kudos to them, right? Like, I really appreciate a highly advanced threat actor. And, of course, targeting the US DoD. And if you think about what we mentioned earlier.
This is for you.
Oh, nice.
Oh, thank you, sir. Ooh, I'm special.
And then this one.
It's for you. Yes! We did it!
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. I think if she
Good to
gives
go?
me the thumbs up, then I'm happy.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, good.
All right.
All right. Go.
Cool.
All right.
So this is the fun thing is if you guys have talked to us this morning, we said, cool, that was a great keynote. We're going to go up to our slides now. And everyone's like, you guys still didn't finish your slides? And we're like, no, we're going to do it live.
Yeah.
Let's just do it live. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking, hey guys, you've been talking about this campaign that you've been tracking since like 2021. That graphic was from 2023. Guys, it is October 2024.
Yeah.
Clearly, they have found Jesus and they've stopped hacking the world.
No, I mean, they've gotten tired. Like, we caught them twice. We published twice. Like, okay, fine, right? Like, we give them a hat tip. They give us a hat tip. We salute across the Pacific Ocean. You're cool. Nice work. Keeping me employed. And then, of course, we just do a really quick check before this report or before we make these slides. And then, oh, no. What's that, Dan?
Is that the exact same certificate we reported
I
on
think
3
it is,
years
Danny.
ago
Oh,
being
look at
active?
that. What's that?
I'm not sure if you guys can actually tell.
Today's
This is
date.
my actual MacBook, and you can see the time was 10:46 a.m. today, October 19th. This is a level of brazen that is very hard to see in the wild, but we have managed to capture it. And since we were working on a time crunch, Ryan updated the graphics without his graphic design skills.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what it looks like. This is why we had to ask if you're from Lumen, because this is definitely a contraband image.
Yeah, it's not in the library. You can't use it.
The other fun little tidbit is, if you recall, the previous, last octet was 227. We have kicked it up to 228. Guys, we'll be back next year with 229.
Yeah. I guess they weren't big fans of Marla Gibbs, the old TV show, 227. All right, screw it. Anyway,
All right.
keep it going.
No one gets your references.
Nobody gets my old guy references.
God.
Okay, let's talk about the other thing that we wanted to talk about, which was cuttlefish. Cuttlefish, if you ever look at one in the wild, they're an incredibly advanced and this whole animal lives and hunts by being camouflaged, right? It does everything that it does based on illusion and speed, and it's small, and they don't live very long, but their complicated level of being able to camouflage themselves is second to none. So we felt like the level of camouflage that this actor did rated a beautiful graphic, which actually we did work on. The funny thing about what this actor did was they were looking for credentials that were in a URL to show the presence of API keys. And then once they had those, they were harvesting tokens and keys for cloud services. Why would cloud services be such a big focus? Because everybody stores all their stuff in the cloud now. So if you can get up to somebody's storage in the cloud using real credentials that a corporate entity has in active service, now you just walk on up to their cloud service and take whatever you want. And it doesn't matter. We could talk about the clouds in use. That really isn't important. Just because it's AWS doesn't mean it was any better secured than Ali Cloud. So the idea here is when two devices that are in a corporate environment talk to each other and then only talk to the cloud, you can consider that a private connection. All right, just think of this as a private local area network, right?
You can also connect remote sites too if you wanted to.
Even though it's a remote site, it becomes a private connection.
There's this virtual private layering service. We can get to that later.
Yeah,
it's kind
VPLS,
of niche.
yeah.
It's great.
The agent obviously has functionality for VPN and SOC 5s for exfiltration of data, for infiltration of whatever they want to put in, but they're using your encryption against you, essentially.
Basically, what we're saying is that everyone who currently has a cloud access, the way you currently secure it is through things like a WAU listing. If you are on the remote router for an authorized site and you are using authorized credentials from the legitimate site, good luck detecting that. But the way this kind of works is, again, you would get a lovely bash script, you would download this host-based thing, you would kind of get some information about like what is the running processes, all the stuff we talked about before. Is there other malware there? Who is my public IP address? You would then download the actual payload. The payload was actually called .timezone. We were calling this Cuttlefish. Once the Cuttlefish actually established itself, it would then talk to a different server. I think it's the same one in this case. Sometimes it was different. And it would basically retrieve all the rule sets about what exactly am I supposed to hijack? What should I be looking for? What credential markers are of interest to me?
And just like with HiatusRAT, you saw a lot of the host-based enumeration. And you obviously, in this case, we already knew we were looking at Chinese threat activity. But when you start talking about binding to ports, I think we could probably skip through this one because we thought about skipping through this one.
No, give me a second. I'm going to hit. All right. So real quick. The way most people do this, if you guys have ever actually done detection, is you will look for a malicious file. You then have something like an EDR or an admin go in. They will basically take a copy of that file and they will bring it back to a sandbox, to a remote location, to a VM, and they'll actually start analyzing that. However, when you actually have a file written to disk, as it's typically called, it makes life really easy. So what they say is they go, hey, we see what you guys are trying to do. We're going to take this file, we're going to load it into memory, bind it to a particular process, and then delete the whole thing from the actual file system. So if you were to try to recover that file, you would have to take a memory image, identify the process, carve out that particular process, and then reconstruct the binary itself. You can do it. It's a giant pain. Don't try it unless you just get paid by the hour. Then you should definitely do it.
And don't think you can unplug that device and hand it to somebody for forensics, because what happens then?
Ooh, if you power cycle and it's in memory, it's gone forever.
Best place to hide it.
Yes.
All right.
So this is, we're basically talking, there's two main functions, the first of which was to perform the sniffer. This would be for your cloud resources, and the second of which was for hijacking your functions. I'm going to hit the cloud stuff because I actually thought this was most interesting. They would basically seek if you're going to a public IP address, and they would actually do some allow listing for certain IP addresses. They would then actually look for presence of particular, what they were calling credential markers. These would be things like API token, auth_token, API keys, things like this that would allow them to authenticate to that remote service. If they saw that, they would then write that to disk on the actual router, and once that hit a certain size, they would zip it up, tar it, send it back home. Now, I know you guys are saying, but why would you go after the cloud? Well, I'm not sure if you guys know this. There's this place called Gartner. They're kind of a thing. We all hate them. It's fine. What they do is they basically are saying everyone is using cloud services. It doesn't matter if you're a small business, medium-sized business, large business. AT&T uses things like Snowflake. These things are everywhere and they're ubiquitous now with the internet because it's just a lot easier to take your data and push it to the cloud because the cloud will secure you. It's someone else's problem. We're good to go. The problem is that because all of the data is moving towards the cloud, that's where all of the threat actors are moving. Once you start actually looking at the cloud, there is nothing like an EDR there that might be on your virtual, actual LAN. There is no network segmentation. There is not a whole lot of identity management, TACX, or anything like that there. It becomes really hard to start delineating who is doing what, and if you have an authorized token, it becomes so much harder. The one thing that I will say is I still can't actually figure this one out. They were actually trying to sniff for port 443, which is typically associated with TLS. You know, there's supposed to be that layer of encryption. We didn't actually see a decryption downgrade capability or a redirector, so we still don't fully understand that one. Maybe encryption saving us? I don't know. It's not bad. Can't hurt anything.
Well, let me see something real quick.
Go for it.
Yeah. Let's go back and underscore one thing about, we put in parentheses there, it's just plain unmonitored. And as Wendy talked about earlier, defenders just have too much on their hands as it is, keeping all the different tools up and running and functional. But when nobody really thinks to monitor or take logs and then later on analyze them and put a SIM over your SIM for your SIM and then be able
Simception.
And once again, this is a threat actor saying, I'm pretty sure that we're going to get over on basic human behavior. And again, like you can't underestimate somebody who's thinking that deeply about what it is you're not doing. Obviously, we're seeing this internal hijack starts off with sniffing for internal IP address ranges that they're looking for just because they want to find the private networks only. And being very decisive and being very patient about finding just those things so they don't spend extra time wandering around and getting caught. Is that you?
Yeah, no, I think that's you.
No, that's you.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So basically, we saw this internal hijack was focused on unencrypted things. So as we kind of mentioned before, encryption might save us. If you guys are familiar with things like DNS, that's UDP 53, it's all in the clear. If you're on like Wireshark, you can see that. TCP 80, also in the clear. It kind of allows you to start enumerating out some of those networks. And we're trying to see, one of the theories is that they might be doing something like a local DNS hijack, where they can actually say, hey, that remote internal IP address that you think is over here, it's actually over here in Alibaba. Why don't we just go send it over there, grab those credentials, and then here you go. Here's the actual response. They would do this through something called the 302 error, which is like a temporary redirection. And they spend a lot of time.
302 error is pretty brilliant, right? Like when you see traffic that you're not going to be able to intercept and you think, okay, fine, I'll redirect that traffic. I'll introduce this error into the data flow, send it to some place that I'm monitoring, and you're essentially kind of man in the middling while you're in a network already. It's pretty great. Somebody did their homework and thought, what's another thing? What?
Oh, the other fun thing about this is this does not require user interaction. So I know everyone loves to dunk on user awareness. The machine just goes, oh, cool, that's a 302 error. Clearly something mistake. Let me just redirect it right over here, and nothing is like visible to the actual end user.
No, the end user never sees that actually happen. So when we talked about how these things were linked, these two different campaigns, right? If you just take a minute and let your eyes wander over, you're going to see a lot of similarity, wouldn't you? Like, corporate wants you to compare these two pictures. They're the same.
So if you guys have ever actually compiled files, you know that typically you have things like build paths. The build paths kind of reveal some information about the person who actually developed and compiled the malware itself. In theory, this stuff should have been scrubbed and removed, but a lot of times it just goes there, especially if you're talking about cross-compiling for something like MIPS on a Windows system. It is a giant pain in the butt. So a lot of the time, that kind of pocket link gets left behind. So in this particular case, we saw that the build paths were left in both the HiatusRAT and the Cuttlefish, and when we compared them, it looked like a 1,000% match.
I mean, just looking at it, it doesn't pass the eye test. Right away, you don't really have to think too much about it. You see the exact same numbers. Build root 2020, 0.02, 0.04, ARM output. It just keeps repeating, and you know right away it's got to be the same shop, if not the same threat actor.
It's probably the same laptop or same VM, if we're being honest.
So, all right, obviously we had talked about this. This isn't the first version of this malware family. A lot of times when we look at certificates, that's the final validator for us. We can actually say, okay, here's the evidence that lets me talk about this later. It's kind of a big deal to get certificates, and when they're the same, well, okay.
Oh, I have to laugh. The prior iteration, so the file itself would actually look for another hidden folder called .putin, which again just kind of made us laugh that, I think they're kind of trolling the attribution thing a little bit, that we're China actors, so we're going to call it Putin. No one will see through our ruse. It's a ruse cruise.
Oh, God. So what was really interesting about this was we found a lot of this took place in Turkish-based IP addresses going back to 2023, and a few U.S. IP addresses. In fact, one of them was a place in Atlanta that we actually tried to notify.
Outside of Atlanta, but yeah, it's fine.
So it was interesting to us, like, why target these satellite providers and telecommunications providers in this area? But once again, you're thinking about Turkey being a major communications route for comms that take place in places like Syria, in Iraq, in Kurdistan, in places like that. And if you're intercepting, satellite phone traffic that's coming through a Turkish provider, you're suddenly picking up American military guys calling people, calling home, calling back to their other teammates, calling back to their bases. Suddenly you're now getting intelligence harvests on U.S. assets that are currently fighting the GWAT in that space.
Legally, we have to say that's speculation, and that is Ryan's personal opinion. It does not reflect that of Lumen Technologies.
That is my personal opinion. Like, I happen to be familiar with that space, and I happen to used to use a cell phone, a satellite phone that was from a Turkish provider.
No, give me a second.
Yeah.
So after we did actually see 1 or 2 U.S. data centers, so of course we then reached out to our counterparts in the detection team once again, and we're like, hey guys, it's us again. They go, oh God.
What?
And we said, hey guys, what are you guys doing to detect, spoofed like API tokens coming from a legitimate site that's being used for cloud resources where we don't have logging? And they're like, guys, are we able to detect this? And that's just kind of their response.
Yeah. I think they were asking us to die. But
yeah,
anyway.
no. I mean, I think it was like a two-way street.
Okay.
All right.
Let's form a narrative here.
Cool.
What can we talk about? Let's wrap this up. All right. Obviously, we already pointed out this. We can belabor this a little bit more, but this thing had been operating for a very long time.
It
and
continues to operate.
Continues
as of
to operate
today,
as of
at,
today.
10:45.
Yeah, it just
Oh,
never
no,
ends.
it's there. The other fun thing is that, again, one of the fun things we like to do is try to extrapolate intent. So when you actually look at some of these malware samples and some of the things like HiatusRAT, and this is actually where the name came from, is the idea is the beacon would take a hiatus or a break at a redirector before it actually reaches C2. That's actually where the name came from.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
I was
now
being
you do.
funny earlier. You just
It's fine.
walk all over my joke.
The fact that they actually had that level of redirector to us denotes that they either had some sort of like Windows-based agent or Linux-based agent that would use that redirector, or that they would use that redirector to talk to something like a web shell. So while we were able to find this router component, this is just a single piece to a larger CNO framework. So again, while we were able to uncover a lot of this stuff over the last 3 years, we still don't have the full story.
And if you're looking at email from 12 different countries, how many really serious nation-state threat groups have enough humans available to them to start breaking down languages from 12 different countries? I mean,
ChatGPT will only get you so far.
it'll only get you so far. So, I mean, this is very patient. Like, steal it now, break it down later, decrypt it later. We'll have the assets for that, store it, and then later on we'll find out something when we look for keywords in that data when my guy shows up who finally speaks Swahili. This is very patient and very calculated.
The other thing is, again, we continue to see these email exchange servers being assaulted nonstop. So basically what they're saying is, rather than trying to join the rat race, let's just take that one stop out, we'll just get that data in transit, and we can live there for years and years and not worry about Defender ruining my party.
Exactly.
Go for
ahead.
it. Yeah, next.
All right, next. Is that the same slide? No.
Yeah,
Okay,
kind of.
yeah. We did talk about this, but
Yeah.
we highlighted it again. Why don't they change their C2 nodes? Like, that's terrible OPSEC. But it does, if you don't think your opponent is up to speed on what you're doing, then you can relax on certain elements of your campaign. And OPSEC is one of them sometimes. And this is either a giant, a challenge to all of us in this room, or laziness by a threat actor that's done so much thinking and so much homework about preparing to go into an environment. I just don't think it's laziness.
I think it's brazenness.
I think it's brazenness. Let's see. Yeah.
Do you want to quote Biggie?
We want to call it what?
I said, are we going to quote Biggie? Tell him Biggie took it.
Tell him Biggie
What
took
the
it.
heck you going to do?
What are you going to do? We're in New York. Come
All
on.
right.
All right. So,
Okay. Targeting Taiwan, it's going to keep happening. The other interesting thing is, again, we basically were seeing that initial campaign targeting Vigors. There was about 3,100 of these things accessible in the world. They only infected 3% of the total population. So again, they weren't just hacking everything willy-nilly. We think they were hacking, they were evaluating, they were seeing what data they were getting, and if they weren't getting good stuff, they were killing the agent and moving on.
as we said many, many times already, today the cloud, obviously, where all your data is going to end up, is now the prime choice for any threat actor. And they continue to modify, just like Wendy said earlier, it's yes, we can keep pushing them into a different space to work, and they're happy to do it. So people who, you will still go into a corporate environment and somebody will tell you, but I've got geo-blocking on. You know, you'll be in a remediation one day and you'll have somebody say, but we're using geo-blocking, nothing from China can come here. Cool story, man. But that's the ice cream shop right next door to your business, and somebody logged in from that and used a real credential. Yeah. Like, that's just how it's going to work from now on.
The other fun thing is a lot of security stacks, sort of spacketing, is directed towards the actual end products. There's very few people doing things to protect that in transit. The way you do that is either through encryption or through things like VPN tunnels. And the other note I will make about this is you might hear some robust debates about IPsec versus WireGuard versus whatever other VPN technology, OpenVPN. Just use something. Anything is better than nothing. Let's start quabbling. Some of the outstanding questions we did have is some of the traffic that they were encrypting was actually encrypted. So it's like port 143, that's supposed to actually be encrypted in transit. They were still collecting that. Why are you collecting encrypted traffic? Are they just trying to, I want to say network, like encrypted data analytics, which is very possible? Are they looking for some sort of crypt weakening, which we didn't see? What exactly was happening? Go ahead.
Steal it now, decrypt it later.
Yep.
All right. We couldn't actually pin down exactly which threat actor did this, but it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, when we saw correlations to HiatusRAT and we could see all these things being reused. It didn't make any difference to us if we had the attribution to the exact threat actor or not at that point.
And the last thing is, again, we saw targeting of like cloud providers, managed IT providers. If you were basically emailing a cloud provider and buying a new server, you're going to get an email that says your new server is stood up at IP address 1234, username root, password, ideally not root. And again, if you're collecting that, you can basically move in there and start hacking things before the customer is even on site. So when they try to take their golden image, you're completely gone.
I'll go back to that one just for a second.
All right, we're like,
who else's
seriously
data
running out
was
of
in
time.
that cloud resource, right? So we're seeing a lot of things where the actual customer of a product doesn't see what the actual managed product is actually doing, whether it's secure. What's that?
1 minute.
Oh, shoot. Okay,
Better hurry
1
up.
minute.
Come
All
on.
right.
All right.
Appropriate.
Yeah,
1 minute.
we're right back. We got it, okay?
Wrap it up,
Let's
B.
see you.
Speed round. Parting thoughts. All right.
Your perimeter goes behind your firewall. This includes things like your corporate routers. Please start, if you guys are going to start taking cybersecurity classes or start working at a firm, ask them if they actually have a perimeter router. What is XCP? When was the last update? Is there logging? Is there anything in place? And again, this also extends not only to the CP that's at the physical remote site, this could actually be things like the router you are using if you are a remote employee. Your perimeter is currently becoming more porous every single day. You just need to at least know that this stuff's happening.
Any VPN is better than no VPN at all. We already said that. Keep
Woo!
going.
All right, last thing. China, Russia, North Korea, all these people, they're not going away. The future is actors are going to start going really high, or as we call it, the cloud, or they're going to start going really low, and they're going to start doing actual PCAP on like layer 2 and layer 3. The middle ground is just covered in spackling. It's broken. We'll fix it later. The last thing is make sure that you identify your most critical assets or your crown jewels and do whatever it is you can to protect them. That's really the only fighting chance you have. Create network segmentation, set up alerts, do EDR, all the fun stuff that takes time that no one wants to do because it's harder than buying a blanky box.
When you start getting complaints from your end user that the most important thing is just 2 more steps to get into and it's just so hard, why'd you make it so hard? You're doing the right thing.
Cool. Finn. I don't know. Are we doing questions or no?
We don't have time for questions, do we? I mean, we'll stay and answer them if anybody's got questions.
Like 2, 3-ish?
Cool. 2, 3-ish?
You're first.
Yeah.
All right, so for the hiatus one, they use like secure networking protocols like FTPS or SMTPS. Would that attack still work on the infrastructure?
So they would still be able to collect the data, but the data itself would be encrypted, and then you're playing the can you break the encryption game. Yep. So again, that's where it gets back to, well, what type of encryption are you using? Is it AES like 1256? Is it CBC? So you can kind of, it's a good approach to protect yourself. It doesn't negate everything, but it's definitely a really solid step.
Russian. Sorry. Will an IDS setup detect all this? Not on the central network.
So the thing is, a lot of the IDSs are typically at the firewall level. The router is 1 hop outside the firewall. So again, if you have something like a beaconing agent going through the firewall, you might be able to pick it up. But if you're packet capturing at the router and the firewall is to stop behind it, there's nothing there.
All right, last question. Anybody over in this area? Nope. Sir. I'm sorry, man. Right. Say it one more
I'm
time.
sorry, a little bit louder.
You talked about North Korea, China, all these things. So how close are we towards full-blown cyber warfare, just like Cold War?
I think that the answer to that question is a little bit more of a politics question, and I think that it's really hard to answer that. We don't worry about that. The question is like how close are we to like full-blown cyber war? I think that they do things proactively to prepare for 5 years down the road. They're doing these things now because they might want to use them in 5 years. So 5 years. All right. Sorry, everybody, that we didn't get you all your questions.
We'll be around.
Yep.
Find us. All right.